been in and out of my mind. Need to talk to somebody through all the things that I can't find. Everything in slow motion, maybe I'm wrong or maybe I'm right. Both share the same fight. Conversations in the dark, finding ways to find light.
Okay, so we are entering into another episode of Conversations in the Dark. My name is Nia Ridgel. I am a licensed clinical therapist, and I am here with my amazing co-host. So you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Dre, executive coach for Black Men, supporting Nia on the Restoring the King platform.
I am Justin, executive producer as well as brand consultant.
Awesome. Okay, so before we get into this, I want to let anyone know we're going to be having a lot of different definitions and words and terminology. If you guys want to get a little bit deeper in your understanding, or maybe I say something that you don't understand, we have added an extra clip. So go ahead and review that extra clip to kind of get the definitions and the understanding of the dialogues that we're using and the different terminology. So we're just going to jump into this episode, and this episode is going to be all about the introduction of healing. The introduction of healing when it pertains to Black men. I think this is a great episode for mothers, grandmothers, fathers, sons, nephews, communities, and people. Yes, and the community, just people in positions of power. Right. So the first question, I'm actually got my handy dandy notebook, so I'm going to be referring to this because I want to make this conversation really conducive. Is around just healing and what it pertains to Black men and their journey. So I kind of want to get it a little bit deeper into the life fulfillment process and the healing process for Black men when it comes to overall trauma as it pertains to how you feel about yourself and success. So my first question is, how do you define success while on your healing journey as a Black man? And does the opportunity for I don't know come into play in that narrative?
I think success in a healing journey. So one of the first thing I'm going to ask is just, I don't know. Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah. So when you're on your healing journey, there's a lot of I don't knows because you don't have the answers to a lot of the blueprint that you're trying to figure out. It can kind of leave you in positions of like hopelessness, powerlessness, or feeling like you're needing to course correct something that you don't have the answers to. So I want to kind of play that into success, like how we label success in our healing journey, especially as a Black man. Like, how does that affect your ability to say I'm successfully on my journey towards healing?
Yeah, no. So I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's plenty of times where there's a bunch of I don't know. And I think part of that is because Black folks in general, in my opinion, especially Black men, haven't been given many blueprints to life. And we also haven't been necessarily taught how to pass blueprints down.
Yeah.
Like my dad went through his own journey, and much of his teaching to me is go figure it out. Right. Whereas like he learned. So when I think about success, a couple of things come to mind that I think are what I would use as like mile markers or measure markers for success. I think one is the quality of the relationships that I have in my life. I think from the time that I was a kid until now, I can see the arc and the trajectory of how relationships gained more quality. How they were shifted from being more surface level relationships to relationships that were much more about depth, where we will go into, deeper, more conversations that I only have with myself, conversations in the dark, to conversations that now encompassed the voices of many people and many people sharing vulnerably their experiences. So definitely relationships. And I think that goes beyond just platonic and romantic. I think it's just any relationship with anybody. I also think, like, for me, another one is just the level of self-reflection that I'm having in that process. I think a successful healing journey is one in which I'm constantly understanding that a journey never culminates. This journey that I'm on is never going to be finished. It's going to be something that I'm constantly going back to, reflecting on, retooling, redefining, adjusting, growing, expanding. And so just making sure that in all the things that I do, and I understand that there's no arrival, but it's constantly about self-reflection. That to me would be a mark of successful.
What about you, Justin?
So for me, obviously success is relative for everybody, right? Everybody's own journey is unique to them and what they've been through, where they're trying to go, and all of those things. So for me, I think they kind of go hand in hand for me. Like I take pride in not knowing things, which sounds weird, but I'm one of those information knowledge seeking based people. So it's like I'm always trying to learn more about myself and others. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple days ago, and she's like, well, you're this way. And I'm asking her constantly, well, tell me why. And it's like, I'm not taking offense to you telling me, but I can't look at myself from the outside looking in. So just me knowing that lets me know I'm still on my healing journey. Because once I feel like I have it figured out, and once I feel like I'm completed, that means I'm really not. And me knowing that alone is just lets me know that I'm being successful and taking the steps to where I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of great concepts. So do you, Dre, about like, first of all, we need to start teaching our kids steps.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Step one. Teach the steps.
We can't keep telling them to figure it out, because that's actually a generational trauma narrative that I'll go a little bit deeper into context of the definitions of what a generational trauma narrative is. But in hindsight, it's pretty much the repetitiveness of behaviors, language, child rearing, and relationships, narratives that we come from that are just habitual generationally. We really don't have a clear definition of why or how. We just know that
this is the way it's always been, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you hear as a kid, right? It's like, hey, don't do as I do as I say, right?
Not as I do,
not as I do. And like, you know, we just do things out of the nature of like, well, this is how it's always been, and so this is how we always are going to do it,
right?
And as a parent, I'm not to cut you off, Nia, as a parent, I don't think we're conscious of that enough.
No, I don't. I think that we parent how we were parented, which comes from a lot of I don't know, but we have to start allowing our kids to process their thoughts in a step-by-step process instead of like
Trying to take it all at once.
pull it from your right brain and really being imaginative about how you're supposed to get things done. Because we do have a process, right? If we can kind of label what that is and take the time necessary instead of parenting our kids like in quick 5-second squirts or spurts, right? That was a great thing you brought up, and I wanted to highlight on that. And then Justin, you had talked about how you've become really comfortable with saying I don't know.
Right.
So that's just like the same thing as becoming comfortable with saying that you're a beginner. And so many Black men have difficulties in their leadership skills when it comes to being a beginner at something. Can you guys kind of like let the audience know, like, how do you guys cope with like being in positions of power and having to not know things and be vulnerable enough to say that?
I'll go first with this one. Ironically, I feel like I'm in my better space in that moment because, like I said, I'm one of those people that what I learned about myself, especially working in corporate America for the past few years after I finished school, and even dealing with like sports and stuff, when I get comfortable and content, I become worthless at times because I don't have anything to drive me. I don't have like once I feel like I figured this out, it's like, okay, what's next? Because if not, I'm going to get bored with this. That's just how my mind works. Like I have to, me and you joke about it all the time. It's like, why do you sit there and thought so much? It's like, I have to do, if not, I feel like I'm going to go crazy.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I just think not knowing and being a beginner is almost intriguing to me. I love trying to learn new things. I love understanding why you do what you do. And then me taking why this person did what they did, why I do what I do, why she does what she does. And then taking pieces from each person and making kind of my decisions on life.
So would a coping skill for you be that you don't sweat the small stuff, or you're okay with like not knowing? Like how do you, like, for a person who wouldn't know how to do that, like how would you walk them through like this is what you do specifically? Like, do you kind of like create space? Do you breathe? Do you make time for like self-care? What do you do?
Well, step one is always realizing like it's okay not to be okay.
Okay.
And being able to do that, I immediately become comfortable again.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like when I do get flustered, I just remind myself like, bro, it's all right. Like nobody has the manual on life. Nobody knows if you do make this decision at this moment, you're going to be successful. Nobody has that playbook, right?
Right.
So I learned that even when it comes from my parents, like me and you talked about before, when it comes like resentment from parents and how they parent you and stuff, it's like, in order for me to forgive everybody around me, and in order for me to be internally happy, I have to understand that. I have to understand that, okay, maybe they're doing what they feel is right in that moment. It's not always an ill intent. It's not always to get over on you or something like that. They might not know. They might not know how to handle you. They might not know how to handle the situation. So just understanding that, like being able to forgive others makes it easier for me to forgive myself. Is kind of what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Because we hold ourselves to such high standards, and you know we want to be these great people at all times. But it's like it's okay to mess up sometimes. You feel me? So,
and like you said, greatness and success is all relative. It's all subjective. It's all up to what we believe.
Right.
I think like when I think about Oh, when you asked the question, I immediately thought about like when I first stepped into being a principal. I had been a successful teacher, I had been a successful assistant principal, and then I was stepping into a principal, and I realized that every step in that journey, I went from being in a place where I knew something to then I didn't know something, right? Being a teacher, I had no freaking clue. Like I thought we were just going to teach out of books. I got there was standards and curriculum. I don't know what that is. I have no idea what this is. And so at all stages, I understood I had to learn and know. But when I got to be a principal and I got to be the leader, like the pinnacle leader, in my head, one of the things mistakes I made in my first year or two was I thought that I had to be the answer. I had to have all of the answers when someone came to me. Like, I'm in charge of upwards of 1,000 people at this time. How can I not have the answers? If I don't have them, then what's going to happen? And when I realized, especially in my second year, was like, I'm going to start telling people I don't know. And I'm going to start giving people the freedom and the understanding that knowledge is acquired and skills are acquired over time. We can't rush and believe that. And I think relating it to the healing journey, we can't believe that we're going to heal things that have taken generations to build up in one day, in 1 week, in one therapy session. It's going to take years of unlearning. It might even take, again, generations below you to unlearn all the things that you've learned over the process of the generations before you. But it doesn't mean that you don't take that step to move that needle now. But it's a lot of...
Can I ask a question, Drake?
Yeah.
You mentioned being a principal, being like the head honcho, the leader or whatever. There's all this added pressure, right?
Right.
I don't think we talk about how much that impacts being like how much being a black man in that position adds to that. You know what I mean? Because even myself, right, growing up in my household, it's like I was always the man of the house, even no matter how old I was, right? Because my dad obviously didn't live with my mom. So my nobody around me understood they were adding this pressure to my life. Oh, you got to go to the NBA. You got to be successful. You got to go to college. And they didn't know they were adding that pressure, but it all added to it. And I was never a principal. I was never, at that point I wasn't a father, but I still had that pressure of just being a black man, trying not to be a statistic. Yeah.
I mean, I'll never forget waking up one morning and being in the middle of getting ready, taking a shower a day after George Floyd was murdered. And I didn't even watch the video until months after.
I've never
and I just, I would recommend not watching it. I remember sitting there and being like, oh snap, I gotta send a message out. Like I can't sit here in the shower all day or sit in the bed all day and feel what I'm feeling. I actually have to lead in some type of way, some type of capacity. It got to the point where I started telling people, I think after George Floyd, there was a couple of different ones. I was like, please stop expecting a message from me every time. But I think when I think about the added pressure of being a black man, a lot of it was internal, but I do think there is a part of this world that puts black men onto this pedestal of we can see what black men are capable of doing. It's all around us, right? The excellence is all there. But I don't necessarily know, like we talked about at the beginning, there's a blueprint. So a lot of the time I was spending there, I spent a lot of time trying to figure things out that I probably didn't necessarily need to figure out if I would have had better examples of how to do certain things. But wholeheartedly, there's a bunch of pressure being a black man and being at certain levels of success, or even not even being at those levels of success and believing that you have the right stuff to get there, but you don't know how to crack that code. And I'm hoping that, what we talk about is it gives black men that liberation, understand that one, like you said, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay not to know. And there is ways that we can give steps and support and resources to help black men achieve those mile markers of success that they set in their lives.
Yeah, and I think that those are really great points, and why community and transparency amongst black men in their healing journey is really imperative, because I see so many black men in just spaces now, because I've worked with black men and I can just see oh, okay, he is high functioning, he can function in his job role, but I can see he probably struggles with anger, or he probably struggles with fear-based thinking, or
that was me,
FOMO, or
oh yeah, absolutely. I got into a place where I just started trying to people please everybody, because there was so many people in the community, and I wanted everyone to see me as Mr. Page, the best principal you had ever had. So part of that for me was I knew when to say no, you can't do that. But I always wanted to make people feel good.
I'm sorry. I really want you to go on, right? But I feel like for what you're saying is so important, because I think, like you said, the pressure is internal, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why I mentioned
some external, but a lot of internal. Yeah.
But I think it's mostly external, because even if let's say myself, right? I'm a black man. I'm working in a bank. I'm going above and beyond to go against the statistics of what you think I should be, right? So that's even more added pressure. So you being a principal, it's like, okay, me being a black man in this position, when they expect me to be in jail selling drugs or whatever, especially a young black man at that.
And I was the first black male principal in my organization's history.
You see what I'm, so that all of that, like, that's not internal pressure. That's I can't. You know what I mean? To me, it's just not, because there's still a standard for what they expect a principal to be. And then as a black man, it's like, okay, I got to make sure. It's like you're not being yourself. You know what I mean? It's like you're taking yourself out of being you just to people please.
That is called code switching.
Yeah, which goes back to Nia's original thing of like, these are things that are passed down to us consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, that keep us in this mind frame of this is how we have to be in order to be whatever X is. Yeah, accepted.
But I think code switching, I think, is a little different, because code switching is being aware of it. Because let's take the word manipulation, right? Manipulation has a negative connotation to it. It's like somebody trying to get over. But I think code switching is a little bit of manipulation. I'm not speaking more proper just because I'm trying to, get one over on you. I'm doing it more so because of the setting and everything. So I more so think that's code switching. But my thing is, code switching is when you're aware of it. The danger is when you're not aware of it. You know what I mean? So you're dealing with this pressure of trying to be a perfect principal because I'm young, I'm this, I'm that, and then I'm black. Does that kind of make sense of what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that can lead to code switching, though, because it's just a natural default, as a defense mechanism. Like when he goes,
it's
like
a survival thing.
Yeah, like Andre was talking about, like for like leadership, when when George Floyd passed, like you didn't have like a mentor or someone at the school saying, hey, let me pull you to the side and let me take care of you. And oftentimes I feel like we do forget about our black men in leadership positions, and it doesn't have to be like in a corporate setting or an educational setting or a career setting. It's just even in a family dynamics and a family structure. That's one thing that I've taken away from these last 2 years of working with black men, is like, we can't really look to them as if they don't need support or like they have everything figured out, because human to human, like we all are all here, and like there's no one way to lead. There's just taking care of our leaders. And I don't think that we've had good examples of the back end on what it takes, like for a black man to lead, so that we can show up in a way that's not dismissive. Or I know a lot of women struggle with submission. A lot of women struggle with just feminine roles as it pertains to leadership, because there's a lot of things psychologically and emotionally and mentally we just don't talk about, that black men go through before they can get to the self-actualization mode to lead from a very sound place. And I think that those are the missing steps in our community, and really the breakdown in communication of what I would like to see more women passionate about that than passionate about trying to be a man leading. Like I don't really, and I only say that from just my own perspective, because I was like, okay, I grew up with a very alpha mother who took the notion, okay, well, if your dad can't do it, I'm just gonna step up, I'm gonna just do it myself. So I saw that growing up. I don't want to do that.
And that's without even a conversation with your pops about like, hey, you're not doing X. I think our family needs X. I'm not. Here's how I think you could do X better.
Or even showing partnership and having conversations around like, how can I help you and how can I meet you halfway? It was more so like, I want this, I want that. If you can't get it for me, then you're in my way. Like, get out of my way so I can just do it myself. So I kind of like saw that growing up, and kind of, I wouldn't even say kinda, I think that's a safe word. I started to manifest that in my life, and then I got around like other people that demonstrated partnership in a healthier way and expected me to know the ins and outs of that. But it's kind of like how you were saying, how we don't really teach our kids how to do things. We just tell them what to do. And I mean, I think I've always had to just figure things out like on my own. But there's some things that I think are worth the conversation. So I'm happy that we're talking about these different roles, the differences behind black men in leading, because it's not just about black women having the higher education or positions of leadership. It's about, okay, now that we have these opportunities, how do we work together collaboratively to make sure that everybody is supporting one another, and it's not crabs in a barrel, because I'm so over that. Right. I am actually very fatigued. So I want to go to the next question, and I really want to talk about like when you're sitting by yourself and nobody's there, and it's just you, and you're having these moments, which we know you guys have. How do you handle those negative self-talk or those negative feelings that come into your consciousness? And what's that like? Because I want to also add, Black men don't cry.
Right. I do. I cry.
Some Black men, majority of Black men, and I only say that because one Black man told me he hasn't cried in 15 years.
There's been times.
And I'm like, where does it go? What do you do? So I want to know, behind closed doors, when no one's there, how do you focus and how do you deal with negative feelings and emotions?
Well, I can't answer the second part because I'm a crier. I'm a big crier. But for the first part, for me, is like, especially like within this last year, dealing with like COVID and everything and working for myself full time, I try to at least allocate myself 2 to 3 days out of that month to just shut off from everything, everybody, and like recharge myself. Right. So there's times when I'm dealing with when I'm dealing with, you know, negative thoughts or, you know, fear-based thinking, things like that, to where it's like I kind of parking lot it and I deal with it during my allocated days. And then I kind of just address it. And instead of addressing it as a negative, I address it as like a challenge. Okay, this is how I'm feeling. You know, if I want to lose weight, you know what I mean? If it's something like that, okay, now I start to just plan. Okay, again, it's taking things by steps. Okay, one thing, remember I hurt my foot, so now I can't work out anymore. All right, so what's next? Okay, step one, damn, let me buy a sauna for the apartment. You know what I mean? Because it's still a way of getting it. Because if I would have just sat in the house and not worked out, gained weight back, then now it's just putting a Band-Aid over a big issue.
You got a sauna at the crib?
Yeah, it's like a small. Yeah, like
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, it's actually pretty dope. But yeah, that's kind of how I deal with it. I just allocate myself a few days to kind of recharge. And again, it's okay not to be okay. I'm never gonna be perfect. I'm never gonna have it all figured out.
Yeah. I think this is a place where I still struggle continuously because I can look at my life and see areas in which I coped with the negative feelings in an unhealthy way. And that probably persists more in my life than in a healthy way. But I've learned over the last couple of years about, you know, what does it look like to do things in a healthy way? Because for so long in my life, I only attributed addiction or problematic, unhealthy behaviors to a certain small list of things that I had been taught through media, through television growing up as a kid, right? Like hard drugs, all that stuff. And so I never did any of that stuff. But there was other things that I realized in my process of my healing journey, like, oh, I was doing this to cope. And while that in isolation, in a one-off situation, isn't necessarily a problematic behavior, habitually doing that behavior can be problematic.
Right.
So I think when I think about the negative feelings that I have inside of me and how I deal with those, I've learned that there are certain things that help me. I know that meditating helps. I know that, you know, yoga, anything that brings me out of my mind and into my body, into presence, helps me to unpack and realize that those negative thought loops are just one part of the story that exists amongst many stories probably going on in my head.
Yeah. Those are some great shares that you guys had. I want to know more about, you know, so if a Black man's hearing this, or let's just say a support that's supporting him, what are some things that supports can do for Black men? Like, what are some signs that Black men are having a hard time? Because one thing I realized in my past relationships is like I wasn't really aware of when the guys I was dating was having a bad day until they blew up. It told me that they were having a bad day, or they were very cutthroat in their responses, and then I was like, oh, okay. So someone's having a bad day. Yeah. I'll just like exit left. What are some things that supports can know when to like let a Black man have his space?
I mean, I think one that comes up for me in my experience with myself and then with other Black men that either I support or I know is when people are kind of the opposite of their natural state, right? If somebody is naturally an outgoing, funny, you know, talkative person, if they retreat and they're quiet and not saying anything, not making jokes, not being humorous, they could potentially, it's not always like this, but they could potentially be in a state or a space that's more of the unpleasant or negative emotions. And I think a support that I find comforting all the time is just when people ask me like, yo, you need anything? Do you need something? when people present the opportunity for help to be given, because I'm not used to asking for help. It's still a struggle for me. It's something that I was never taught, never really understood. And so I'm still in the process of exploring that. But just the presentation of help being there, it allows me to understand I'm not alone. I'm not just dealing with this by myself, because I think it's easy for Black men to step into a space and be like, I'm alone, because there's not many of me out here. And if there are a bunch of me out here, we're not always portrayed in the most positive light. And so it can feel very isolating being a Black man, at least for me and people I know in our society.
I'm going to ask another, just for the sake of time, and I want you to keep it short. What about touch? Because I feel like not enough Black men get nurtured when it comes to touch. And I'm just learning a lot about like somatic therapy and how touch is really essential. So what about like when you're having those bad days, like would you want to be comforted during that time?
I think I've become more comfortable with touch. I think at certain points in my life, I wasn't necessarily as comfortable. But I think for me, I love being like, there's times where I love being, touched, especially rubbing, massages. Those feel great. So I think it's definitely one of those things. Depending on where a man is in his journey, it could be something that's very helpful.
Where would a man need to be in his journey for a touch to feel acceptable?
That's a great question. Probably in a state where he's comfortable in his body. I know that there's times where I'm not necessarily comfortable in my body, whether I've gained a little weight because I'm not working out as much, or I'm eating too much, or just not feeling it, that I can feel a little bit less inclined to want to be touched. But I think, that if a man is comfortable in his body, that can always be a nice.
That is such a powerful statement, when a man is comfortable in his body, because I'm sorry.
No, you're good. That's why we reset it.
You just assume that guys are just comfortable in their bodies.
Well, I had a large awakening when I was reading this book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, who talks a lot about racialized trauma not existing only in the mind, but more so in the body, and we need to explore that. And as I thought about it, I started thinking about the fact that all of us inhabit bodies that have experiences that are only unique to us. Mm-hmm. Like no one else knows, right? So like when I come up behind, Justin, or if I'm his teammate and I wrap my arm around him in a certain way, that could trigger something in him because only he's experienced life in his body. And and when I started thinking about that, I was like, wow, how can I become more comfortable in my own body, or where are the seasons and the times where I can realize where I'm less comfortable versus where I'm more comfortable? And what does that mean? And why is this something we never talk about? Because I'm sure that everybody might think about it. And, Justin's, he verifying that. So it's fact. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things where when I had the moment too, I was just like, wow, like we only get this one body and all of us experience it only with ourselves. We only see life through ourselves, but no one else really knows what it's like to do that.
Yeah. And I really feel that that's the way that healing is going. When we get outside of the trauma, because, people just start realizing they were depressed, and, everybody's depressed and everybody has anxiety. And I definitely
it's been there.
Don't want to belittle any of those things. Right. But I do want to notice that it's always been there. We've just kind of been resilient, and that's why I hate that word, resiliency, because the connotation associated with Black people is push through, mm-hmm. right? And there's certain things in our body that trigger us in depression or in anxiety that tell us not to push through. Mm-hmm. But we're so used to producing that without productivity, then all of our other mental states start to go by the wayside. So we rather just be resilient and push through. So touch, for those men and those women who are not used to affection, is actually a healing property, and it helps with mood stabilization. It also helps with mental clarity. It helps with body functionality. It helps with so many different things, and it will help you save more money if you just did it without a sexual connotation associated with it. Okay? Because a lot of people think if I touch you, we're having sex. No.
Intimacy is much broader than sex.
Right. That is the extra step, okay? Before that step, you have to get used to touch without associating it with sex. So, Justin, what do you think about just how you process things and how you process traumas and things of that
and how
nature?
to share, how people can
support you.
Black women.
Support you.
So for me, one of my biggest things is just realizing and understanding that I'm gonna have those kind of days, right, where I don't feel like being bothered. And if I am having those days, it's like obviously the first thing, in my opinion, would be ask questions, right? Like just which could be annoying to some people. But one of my biggest pet peeves, like when I'm dealing with like a, somebody, let's not say romantic or platonic. Let's just say somebody I frequent, somebody I converse with on a regular, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I might come into. I just think is if I am having those bad days, don't internalize it to where you're the cause of the bad days.
Oh, okay,
That's
yeah.
my biggest
God, we
thing.
so
That's
do
the worst.
that.
No, it is. Because it's like I could, like, let's say if we live together, right? I could be, and it even goes hand in hand with the touch thing, right? Let's say, because I'm a guy where it's like some days I might want it, some days I don't want you to touch me at all. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how I am. I've always been like that. I know.
Do you let them know that?
Do they ask?
I don't know.
That's my point. It depends. If they ask, of course I'm going to say it. But I'm not going to just say, hey, there might be some days where I don't want you to touch me. But I just feel like when it comes to stuff like that, like just because I'm saying I don't like let's say if we're watching a movie and you come sit next to me, if I get up shortly after it's not because I don't want to sit next to you. I just might have a lot on my mind. So when I am in my comfortable space and I get to finally relax or whatever, I don't need everything else I've dealt with that day. I don't need you to come in and add a stressor because I don't want to really talk about what happened that day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm only like, I'm smiling only because I totally get it. Because my clients will tell me like, I really don't want a woman year round. I only want
like
her
as far as what be like a relationship.
a relationship.
Really, that's interesting.
Because they have to like not be okay in front of them, and sometimes they just don't want to deal with the conflict that it takes and the level of responsibility that it takes to like sustain a relationship. And so on those days that you're talking about, like they don't want them there, but it sends mixed messages,
But women go through menstrual cycles, and it's pretty much the same thing.
No, I don't know what you're talking about because I'm the best. I'm just kidding. No. Yeah, and I think it goes when it boils down to is communication, and then talking about like
Those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, I love the way that Andrea talked about like that men sometimes don't feel secure in their bodies. Like I would love to have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
Like that would be like best friend conversation. I don't know why we don't talk about this stuff instead of talking about like, I feel like
Men might be the most insecure about their bodies, to be honest with you.
That's
Especially
so
when
crazy.
when you get in conversations with other men about body stuff.
We should all sit down and have like warm blankets and hot tea and cocoa and just talk about this stuff. I think.
And spill the tea.
Right. I think as more men start to really practice self-care, I think that's the barrier between these conversations, because sometimes it doesn't sound masculine to talk about caring for yourself or the fact that you may have body image issues. But women love talking about stuff like this. We would love to get down and communicate because we talk about this stuff all the time anyway. And so I think that will also bring more camaraderie in a relationship, because like if I know personally that you are having issues with your body, I'm going to support you, like, let's go to the gym, or, making sure that I'm not putting the pressure on going out to dinner so much, or I'm helping you with, I think that women are like super supportive in that way, but sometimes we can overkill. So that's when communication comes in at, but I think that it'll help us in not trying to figure out what to do. And it goes back to those steps that we're talking about. Right. So yeah, I think that's great, guys. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
Which is a great segue into triggers. I want to talk about, as you're on your healing journey, and you get triggered, back into your old self and your old habits. How do you guys manage that? Like that 2 steps back to go 1 step forward mentality. How do you guys manage that?
That's like my most vulnerable spot right there. That's one of my how I manage it now, and it's not, I know this isn't the right way, but I try to avoid it at all costs. That's just where I'm at in my life right now. I have so much going on that I can't address it head on. So
that's real.
My main thing is, okay, let me not put myself in positions to where I'll get triggered. Let me try my hardest not to be around certain people, in certain environments. You know what I mean? That's why I'm always alone. It goes back to that, like protecting my peace. I'm not far along enough in my journey to where I can control that part yet. So it's easier for me now in this space to just, again, isolate myself. And again, I know it's not good. I know that, but that's just.
Why are you saying that? This is what you do.
No, I'm not talking to you. I'm speaking in general to people.
No, I think it's a good thing.
People say that, like, why do you isolate yourself? You need to, all this stuff. Everybody has their perspective of what they think works. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I'm not talking to you directly.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like.
No.
I think I'm similar in that, like, I've always been a big extrovert, right? And that means you get your energy from people. It doesn't always mean that you want to be around people, but you get a lot of energy from being people. And I've noticed the more people I've been around, and then on top of that, the more people that I'm responsible for leading or ensuring the safety of, that makes me want to retreat back into my own self as much as possible. I think one of the things that comes to mind when I think about triggers that potentially bring up, the unhealing journey, the opposite of the healing journey, I think like Justin said, is being mindful about places and spaces and people, right? A lot of the things that I read when I study this book on African philosophy, talking about the 7 principles of Ma'at, one of the things it talks about is there's 2 sections that say, like, be mindful of the company you keep and be careful of the places you go. And so I try to be very cognizant. Okay, cool. I'm going to go out with my partner and her friends. We're going to bars. Okay. Am I driving? Okay, cool. If I'm driving, hard no on drinking. Hard no, because I'm not going down that road no more. If I'm going to be with my homeboys and we're going to go out, okay, well, I need to have a conversation with them about, the relationship that I'm in, so they know don't expect me to be no wingman or things like that. I think there's a lot of conversations that I try to have with myself about where I've been and what I know is already there, because I've already been there. I know what it's like, even if it's a new scenario of where I've been, it's still the same place. But those are typically what I try to do when I have those triggers. But it can be very hard, because especially if, I think the more years that go by, right, the longer we have time on this earth, the longer we're in this body, in this spirit, in this moment, you get more triggers. More triggers, but you also develop more ability to cope, right, or potentially a stronger sense of self, depending on who you are. And that allows you to recognize the trigger sooner. So I think that's where I'm at in my stage, is just recognizing and unpacking those triggers, because I'm still new to, this level of consciousness at where I'm at now.
Right. I think that's a great place to be for the both of you. That place of awareness where there's no judgment, there's just experience and exploration. I think that a lot of Black men, if they would just kind of lay their armor down and really get into themselves, would find it really gratifying and a lot of less stress if they just relaxed and let things just happen, and process what's happening instead of trying to be in front of what's happening all the time.
Part of that is, like, Black men need to have open dialogues with one another about that, right? If we're not creating safe emotional spaces amongst each other to do that, like, it makes it much harder to do what you're saying on an individual basis.
Right.
My whole life is like, the moment that another Black man is vulnerable and allows me to be vulnerable, boom, my life has changed instantaneously in that moment for the better.
Right. Yeah. Each one teach one.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
So that is going to do it for this episode. Mm-hmm. We are going to talk about so many more topics that have to do with Black men healing, but this one was a great one. I got my notes. So thank you on helping us women and supports of Black men to know how to better take care of you guys and create safe spaces for transparency. So we will see you guys.
Absolutely. Click that subscribe button.
Yes, sir.